Thank you so much for coming, Hadal. Thank you for bringing so many folks here. You're doing wonderful things in ELT. So we're excited to hear what you have to tell us today. Thanks so much to the American TESOL Institute for making this webinar series, Featured Teachers, possible. Hadal, if you could introduce yourself so that people who don't know who you are and what you do, especially as far as American TESOL's audience goes, we have a lot of new teachers, some who are just getting started. So it's always interesting to hear, how our guest, our featured teacher, got into teaching. So maybe that would be a good way to start.
Thank you, Jason. It's an honor to be here and to share a little bit of what I have learned along the way with fellow teachers and students. So yes, my name is Hadar, and I started my journey has started by being a student of English. English is not my native language, and I'm born and raised in Israel. And when I was 20, I moved to the US, and that was my first encounter with English, a very limited encounter. And I'm going to briefly go through this journey, but I actually went to the US to study acting, and there I fell in love with the sounds of English. I was about to say the sounds of music, but it's almost the same, the sounds of English. And it had a huge impact on my fluency and confidence and my ability to communicate and express myself. And years later, after I'd moved back to Israel, trying to figure out what to do with my life, I realized that I have this passion that I need to explore. And I needed the extra cash. So I started tutoring and I started teaching pronunciation because I remembered this is something that I really loved and was good at as a student. Throughout my training, I acquired an American accent and different dialects of English. So it was like this knowledge that I wanted to do something with, and I didn't know exactly what. And I started teaching privately students, and gradually I grew and started teaching groups and training in companies. And then I decided to start a YouTube channel. I'm really kind of like making it very narrow and limited. But that's where I discovered my online community and the possibilities you have as a teacher to reach people and make an impact, whether they're paying students.
What year was that approximately when you started your YouTube channel?
2015.
2015, okay.
Yeah, the end of 2015. I was 9 months pregnant, and I made a commitment to start creating weekly content. I guess it was like that urgency that I felt like I don't want my life to, stop. So I pushed forward and I made that commitment. And for many months, we created weekly content that was not seen by many people. Just a reminder for teachers who want to create content on YouTube that not, I do have over 700,000 subscribers now, but it wasn't always easy and quick.
Sure.
And so it was a long, tedious process. But like I said, that going online has taught me so many things about what people really need, because I got into deeper conversations with people that ended up being so much more than just pronunciation. Because coming from, when I learned in school, I was obsessed with the sounds and, sounding native and all of that, because as an actor, you want to, land roles.
Sure.
That, like an American role, I didn't want to always get cast as the foreigner. So for me, reaching that perfection, whatever that means back then, that was like my ideal, that was the goal. And I carried that into my teaching in the first few years, but then I got acquainted with the online environment sphere and what people really need. And I think we also created a community on Facebook where I started seeing the faces of the people who are watching my videos. We started connecting through videos, and then that has helped me understand how to help them better, what they need, and also to open myself up to different languages and different sounds and different needs. And I think that so for over, 13 years, I've had the experience of working with thousands of people ultimately, who speak different languages. And I think that what I want to share today is what I've learned from that experience. Because I feel now that I have a very specific way of teaching pronunciation, that it's like easy to digest and intuitive for students to understand. Being a non-native speaker, I know what I had to do, how I had to process sounds in my head to be able to produce them. And that is a little different, I think, than just like receiving the information. This is how it's supposed to sound. And so I think that experience of like me going through this process, but also seeing what works and what doesn't with really like thousands of people, gave me some clues on how to make it most effective and simple and intuitive for the students.
So I get how it's been evolving along the way. Would you say you're at a point where you kind of figured it out? Or, I mean, obviously it will always evolve in certain ways, but do you feel like confident now that you've worked with enough people that you've sort of reached a point where what you're going to talk to us about today is sort of the way you're teaching?
It's a really good question. I think I'm always learning, like I'm always changing. I created a new program about a year and a half ago, and there's already like things that I feel like, oh, I can explain it better. And this needs to I need to develop here and there. But, my main, my main focus when teaching pronunciation has not just been the pronunciation, but also the thought work and the mindset work that goes with it. Right. Where there's definitely so much more room for me to develop. And I think it has to go together. And I'm going to talk about it today, but it has to go together to get the best results for the students. And so I think I've reached a place where I'm confident to say I know it works. I also had a a teacher's training program for a little bit, and that has been really effective for teachers. And yeah, I think that I have some knowledge about pronunciation that I'm confident in.
Yeah, that is definitely an understatement right there. So let's get into it.
All right, so I'll share the slides just to keep me on track. And here's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about why pronunciation is important, especially for teachers who are thinking about teaching pronunciation. And I want to include in that non-native speaking teachers who don't think that they are, like they should teach pronunciation. So I want to say that this is important for everyone, for, like no matter what your first language is. I'm going to share with you my pronunciation teaching framework, which is the steps I follow to teach pronunciation, and how to set your students up for success. Now, I have a lot of students here, and I hope that they would be able to share in the chat some of their experience, like if something resonates with them. So first of all, why is it important? And here's what teaching pronunciation and prosody will do for our students. First of all, it will increase intelligibility, right? The obvious. It's going to help them sound clear. And if they sound clear, they're going to get what they want, and they're going to make the changes and change the circumstances in their lives so that they can be happier, right? Ultimately, it's not just about English and getting better at English. Improve comprehension. So even if they don't change their ability to pronounce sounds, when you process things in your mouth, you process things better in your head. A lot of times when students don't understand speakers of English, then native or non-native, it has to do with the fact that the brain filters out a lot of information that is not relevant for them, not relevant for their first language. And sometimes practicing elements of speech, especially reductions, especially when it comes to prosody, right? How we put it all together, intonation, rhythm, stress, it helps them understand speakers better. It also builds confidence, right? It will build confidence because they would be more confident in how they sound. The act of practicing requires them to be vocal, to be audible, right? Like then, and that would build up their confidence using English, even if it's like artificially. But the repetitions are really, really powerful when speaking, right? When if you want to build confidence, and that also helps to develop fluency, because a lot of times we get stuck because we're not sure if we pronounce something correctly. People may avoid using a specific word because they're not sure how to pronounce it. They're afraid of the R, they're afraid of the TH. So they'll kind of like take so many detours in their brain in structuring a sentence, and that affects fluency. And of course, lack of confidence in pronunciation or how they sound, or the fear of sounding incorrect or less intelligent because of their accent, so many beliefs that were instilled in them by, society and themselves. So all of that affects fluency. And when you build your pronunciation, when you improve your pronunciation, it definitely helps with all of that. So I want to go through the steps. I tried to put it into this formula of the 8 Ps. I could actually find specific words, but yeah, so let's start with prioritization, because here's the thing. A lot of times people have like a set of tools and they know all the sounds of English, consonants, vowels, and, some people just stay with pronunciation, and others are confident enough to take it to prosody because it does require like a deeper understanding of the language. But a lot of times like the teaching is just done according to a certain curriculum or the order of sounds. And I think it is so important to help the students prioritize what they need to focus on and to teach them the 20%, right? So like I was debating between prioritization or Pareto principle, because they don't need to learn everything, especially in the first stage, right? At the first stage, because they need to focus on the things that will get them clarity. And I'm really talking about, let's say, like a one-on-one teaching experience, or if you teach a small group of speakers of a certain language. When you go online and you scale, it's a little different. So you have to give the students tools how to be able to do that. But now I'm speaking about like one-on-one training or in a classroom. So you really have to, you want to start teaching them the most important thing that will help them gain clarity. And how do you do that? Well, it's a skill that needs to be developed, like being able to hear a student and to say, okay, I'm noticing a few things. What is more important, right? Is the flap T that I'm noticing, because they're using a regular T, really as important as them dropping consonants, or is it just easier for me to teach, right? So they need to know what is crucial for their clarity, and also to prioritize the importance of pronunciation challenges, and to teach it according to that order. And that is something that I usually do right at the beginning. It's part of my speech analysis process, where I hear them and then I identify it for them, or I teach my students how to do it for themselves. The next step, let's say we agreed that we want to teach the R or the TH, right? Or the sheep-ship vowel pair. The next part is perception, because if they can't hear it, they can't make it. So I cannot teach them how to produce a sound if their brain still confuses that sound with another sound, if they can't even hear it, right? So some are going to be very obvious, especially when, the spelling aligns with pronunciation, like a TH. That's usually an easy sound for them to perceive and to teach. I usually like to start with a TH because it's like quick wins. But it's important for them to first be able to hear it. And it's important to spend time. If I try to teach the difference between sheep, ship, and they can't hear it, then I need to do whatever I can to make them understand, with a lot of repetition, first hearing it, and then of course trying it themselves. And I think at this stage, it's also important to show them how tricky perception can be. So what I would normally do is I'd introduce a very obvious sound, like, can you hear the difference between they and day? Yes, check, good. Can you hear the difference between sheep and ship? Yes, check, good. Can you hear the difference between well and well? Then sometimes for some speakers, that could be a little, wait, what? Well and well. All right. And then I explain about the dark L. It's the same word. It's not a different word. What about pay and pay? Then like I go from something very obvious to something more and more subtle. And then they'd be like, it's the same. Or some people might hear something but won't be able to put it in words. And if I can get them to understand that there is something in the language that they weren't aware of before, then they need to understand that this part, processing the sound and the perception and changing how they listen to sounds, is really important, right? And I always repeat it, if you can't hear it, you can't make it. And then once they understand what the sound is, it's all about the technicality. Now, I am talking specifically about sounds, but it's the same with prosody, right? Intonation, rhythm, pitch, right? Can you hear pitch? Can you hear the difference between hello and hello, right? So we could totally do the same thing with prosody as well. And then you teach them how to produce it themselves, right? And that's like the science of where to place the tongue, what to do with the lips, what to do with the jaw. And at first, I explained the sound as is, without any assumptions around how they would perceive it and what they would do. But that stage is really short. So I give them the tools, right? I teach them what happens in the mouth, because I really think that clarity is really important. And I cannot just expect them to say, okay, there is say it, or it's not going to work, right? Like for some people it might, for others, they might need like the details of what's happening. So we need to assume that different students learn differently, but also we always want to give them this foundation of understanding what happens here, right? So then I explain it perfectly, and I'm not expecting them to produce it the way I produce it. I just give them the kind of like, this is what it is. And then I go into prediction. This is my job here as a teacher, to tell them, so this is the sound. However, here's what's going to happen to you. And then I tell them based on what I heard, or based on their first language. I also, I do like to learn the phonology of the language of the speaker, right? Because I believe that there's a lot of information that we can get from there to help our students understand something. So for example, if I try to pronounce, like to teach them the R, and let's say it's a Japanese speaker, I might say, okay, but when you hear the R, you might think of an R like a tap, and that is actually the sound of an L in your language. And that's why these two sounds might get confused, because sometimes you replace the R and the L, and both of them are perceived in your language as the same sound. And this is why your R might sound like an L and vice versa, right? So I predict the challenge. Let's say I teach the TH. I might say something like, okay, because you don't have a TH in your language, here's what's going to happen to you. You're not going to want to stick the tongue out, right? You're going to keep it inside. And then what's going to happen? It's going to sound like a T or a D. This is what's going to happen. So anticipate that, stick the tongue out, work with the mirror, use your finger, feel the air, right? So I give them tools to overcome the challenge that I know they're going to face based on what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, and what I know. So this part is so important, not only because it gives them tools, it builds trust. Because when they hear that, they're like, she knows what I'm going through. This is exactly what it feels like. Okay, I'm going to do what she says, or, and then I think the entire process of teaching pronunciation requires a lot of trust building, so that when I give positive or negative feedback, never negative, right? Positive or constructive feedback, they would take it and know that I have their best in mind, right? Like that whatever I'm going to say to them is going to be valuable. So this is like one of the most important parts in teaching pronunciation. And I think that is the part where it kind of like drops the pennies. The pennies drop when we get to that part. And then it's the stage of feedback, right? Performance. We are really looking at their performance and giving them specific feedback on what they need to do. We talked about prediction. So let's say we're talking about TH. I told them what's going to happen to them. And now we're practicing, and they're going to practice sounds, and they're going to say think. So I give them very specific feedback. I try to be as precise and specific as possible. But also, I have to take into consideration who is the person standing in front of me. If, I cannot be too specific if I feel that it's a little overwhelming for them. If it's so hard for them to even stick the tongue out, I would be so happy with them just sticking the tongue out, even if it still sounds like a T. So the importance is to take it step by step by step and to get them to do something that is out of their comfort zone, that is a little challenging, even if it's not ideal, according to the speech coach in my head that, is looking for the precise sound. I'm not looking for precise sounds. I'm looking for progress, improvement, and for change. One of the things that I tell my students all the time is like clarity over accuracy, right? As long as I get them to be clearer, and prioritization has a big part in it, then that is what matters, right? Being accurate and kind of like working so hard just to get that sound is not as important as getting them to sound clear. Now, I'm going to talk about it because sometimes we do need to take into consideration what the student wants, but but that's about that. And then practice, right? We have to enforce. I wanted to say enforce. No, but we have to get them excited about the practice, because without practice and repetition, it's just not going to become a part of their speech. It's not going to be, spontaneous. And it's not just about telling them, oh, you need to practice every day. What's important is to really drive them into understanding that this is what they want, that this is good for them, that this would get them that confidence that they're looking for. And a good way to do it is by getting them quick wins, like the TH, for example. I wouldn't start with aspirated P's or with the R that is a little more challenging. I would start with something that if they practice it enough, they will see that it actually works, as long as they're, precise and they're doing the work. So this is a very important part. And also as teachers, we need to make sure that everything is super accessible to our students, for our students, and also they know exactly what they need to do, right? And I'm from experience, I used to teach for many years and I'd be like, okay, now practice it. And then they wouldn't know exactly what to practice, or I'll upload I'll send them the PDF 5 days later, or I would send it to them, but, wouldn't tell them how to practice exactly. So whenever there is friction, and that's more about habits, right? Like in building habits, because that's what practice is about. Whenever there is friction, they're going to avoid the work. They're going to have resistance. So we want to eliminate any friction that is possible. So we need to motivate them and to explain why practice is so important. And at the same time, make it super easy and accessible for them to practice. And, think of how you build the foundations of your business, and remember that this is a huge part of it. And make it easy, right? Like when it comes to practice, and again, it has to do with habit building. We don't want, when I went to acting school, my speech teacher told me you have to practice 2 hours every day. And not only that I didn't do it, I was like really ashamed of not doing it. I was working, I was, like an acting student. I had my things to do. But it was very kind of like, I got so stressed out about it. So I think it's important to also not demand too much, and to really make sure that they do the bare minimum, but they do the things that would get them results. As they build that habit, the practice habit, and start really enjoying it, then we can push them to do more. And this is where we go into persistence, because a lot of times what happens, people get excited about a sound, they practice it for a little bit, and then they forget about it, or they, they don't want to do it anymore, and this is definitely connected, but it's important to say that we have to come back to it even after practicing it initially, because this work is for the long run. It's for the long haul, and they can't practice something for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and then expect it to be there when they're speaking. It's just not going to be there. It's going to be, and then they're going to feel frustrated. I know the sound, I know how it's supposed to sound, but then it doesn't come out of my mouth. So practice, the act of like committing and building habits, as well as persistence, repetition, is really what would get them from just like that theory or the initial experience with sounds to being able to use it spontaneously when speaking. And that also has to do with, I had to find something with a P, purposefulness, which is another word with a P for intention and intentional practice. And that is another thing that I believe people avoid or they don't think is that important. And that is the work of taking a sound that the student has learned and helping them use it intentionally when speaking. Because like I said, there is always a gap between the English, the practice and their ability to use a sound, and then it starting to show up spontaneously, right? Like where they own it, it becomes their own. And repetition helps to a degree, right? It builds the pronunciation confidence, the muscle memory, but it's not enough. Because when speaking, there are so many things that go through a person's head, like, this, how to structure a sentence and the grammar and and listening to the other person. And they can't, also sometimes the pronunciation does not come, and then they get frustrated because why have I used this R? Why am I not using all the intonation that I've learned? And then there is the stage of using what they've learned intentionally when speaking freely. So what I would recommend is just to record themselves or to speak with a teacher or to speak with a friend, focusing on their key sounds, right? So like really having that external ear while speaking, paying attention to how they sound and focusing. And it needs to be a controlled environment, because I wouldn't want them to do it when they're in a meeting at work or speaking to a friend. They don't need to be conscious of their speech when they're speaking, because they need to be present, and they like, I don't want it to limit their fluency. But at the same time, it's important for them to use the sounds when speaking freely and being aware of it. So this is why I think it needs to be created in a controlled environment. And that intentional practice, purposeful practice, is what's going to help them get there, right? The idea is to like really bring them closer to where they want to be. So it's like, this is how it's layered, like stage by stage by stage by stage. And ultimately that's the closest thing to using the sounds spontaneously. And then the magic happens. The magic happens like right at the beginning, actually. They get a lot of wins right at the beginning, but this is like the gradual work. All right. So now, like just the theory is not enough, right? Like we need to set our students up for success. And it's just a little bit of, the things that I work with or follow. And again, like I think this is designed for teachers who teach one-on-one or groups. So that like it's still like an individual process for each person, and then it's possible to scale it. But I think that for whoever is watching, it would be more relevant if I talk about the individual process. So first of all, and this goes back to prioritization, is consider their speech needs, right? Like what is the most important for them to work on? Because I've had a lot of students who really wanted to sound like a native, right? Like, and then we also needed to debunk that, but sometimes it's hard. People come in with that, that's the solution. And then I hear them and I know that they need other things. Like I know that they need like the confidence work. I know that they need the fluency work. So I wouldn't automatically just do whatever they want. At the same time, and I'll talk about it in a second, I definitely want them to set goals and help them reach those goals. So we need to be on the same page. I'm not going to do something that they don't want. but I definitely want to look at where they're coming from, what they need. I have students who, are like really set on their intonation, let's say. And, I noticed that they drop sounds. So the intonation is not as critical as the sounds. And I definitely design the training or the curriculum of their training based on what I'm hearing. So there's never a set schedule, and that's it. Even in companies, like I work with companies, I work with big groups. There's, like I always say, this is the curriculum, but I want you to know that it's going to change, because there's always something that needs to be addressed, and it will be. So that flexibility is really, really important. And I know that, especially for teachers who are starting out and using specific resources and outlines and stuff like that, it's really hard to move away. They sometimes don't trust themselves, and like they don't believe that they have enough experience. But I really want people to trust their intuition, and to kind of like have that, to be able to shift what they're used to teaching into what the person really needs. Also consider their capacity for learning, because I work differently, or I instruct my students differently when they are aspiring actors who, live alone and they're young and they have all the time in the world, or let's say students, or a busy parent, or someone who's working in high tech and has no time whatsoever, or someone who's unemployed. I have to understand the context in which they live to be able to give them the tools to do the work, and to not feel like they're not doing enough, or they're not, they're never going to get it because they don't have time. And on the other hand, if they have a lot of time and passion, and they're, this is what they want to do, I don't want to be like, oh no, this is the only thing that we're doing. So I want to be able to accommodate their needs and the context in which they kind of like they exist, and to understand their English needs. Of course, and again, back to speech needs and general needs, I think I have it in, their goal. Okay, what do they want? They want to, is it really, and consider their goal, and also help them identify their goal. A lot of times, again, back to, I want to sound like a native. Is this really what you want? Or do you want to feel more confident? What does that look like to you when you say, I want to sound like a native? What would it allow you to do? Can you achieve that doing other things as well? So we want to set goals, first of all, for them to understand what success looks like, and also to know if they wanted for their personal, fun, enjoyment, right? Like it's like a personal achievement that they're working towards, or is it because they want to get a better job? And I would always change the content. Let's say if they want to get a better job, or they, so instead of just simulating conversation, we might simulate a job interview, and I would give them feedback having that specific conversation, but I'm getting them closer to where they want to be, and also making it possible. Like the fact that we're having an interview in English creates a possibility of them having an interview in English. So I want to make that, to really include that in the training and in how we do things, right? If someone wants to focus on public speaking, I've worked with a lot of lecturers and public speakers, then we would analyze TED Talks and work on that. So like, I think this is a fundamental part. I think it's intuitive for most teachers, but it goes back to being flexible, understanding what they really need and what they want. And then create a safe space for them. So I have more about that, because one of the things that we see is that our students have this feeling like they're not good enough, right? Because their English is not good enough. There's this gap between who they are in their first language and who they are in English. And we really want to bridge that gap. And to be able to do that, there are a few things that need to happen. And a lot of times, and if we're thinking of conventional teaching where there is like right and wrong, and you get rewarded for doing well and you get punished for making mistakes, and the whole concept of not making mistakes, and like in not just in English, in pretty much everything, and the strive for perfection, and all of that does not create an environment where our students can actually thrive, most of our students. So our job is really to make sure that while we need to be professional and do the teaching, it's not always the most important thing. And it's not important if you're not allowing your student to feel safe. And here are some of the things that can help create a safe space, make them feel heard and understood. And I have had experiences where I spoke to my students and it was hard for me to understand them, right? But I would never let them, make them feel like I don't understand or repeat or be impatient, even though sometimes we might respond, react, not even respond, but react unintentionally and make a face or something like that. And I think we have to be very conscious of that, because students sometimes are so sensitive to this or any look that they would see it in us, and then that might hold them back or stop them from feeling safe with you, and then they would always kind of like think about how they sound so they don't experience that. A lot of students have traumas from school, from teachers who have made fun of them, and they bring that into the classroom, and it's really important to clean that up and to make them feel like they are enough and there is space for everything and for their English as it is, right? It's already good enough. And make them feel heard. Sorry, I'm going to come back to this. Teachers, and I was one of them, love to talk. And they love explaining. And sometimes we end up over-explaining and talking a lot, and we forget to listen and to let our students do the talking. So that's one thing. Make sure that you are not, like in the center of the class, but the student is. And the second thing is that it's okay. I think it also comes not just from that passion to explain, but also from, I gotta make their time worthwhile, right? They're paying me and I need to prove that I'm a good teacher. And because of that, I'm gonna do a lot of teaching, right? I'm gonna tell them everything that I know. And sometimes more is not necessarily better because it could be overwhelming. And, there is a limit to a person's capacity and how much they can learn at a given time. And sometimes we feel like if they speak, we're not doing anything. So they're going to feel like they're not, it's not worth it. And I think it's so wrong. Like, I think it's so important to understand that just the act of speaking and having someone to take care of you and to tell you how you can improve or what to say, giving you feedback in a healthy way, not everything, but like just the most important things, and guide you through it, that's all they need, right? Even if it feels like it's not enough as teachers. Focus on them, not others. I'm going to explain. A lot of times I see in the messaging of especially pronunciation teaching is improve your pronunciation so it's easier for others to understand you. And that, again, brings us to this place of you need to work hard to be accepted. You need to, you don't belong, and you need to do something so that you will belong in the English language world. And it's just a small shift in the language and the focus, but I think it's really important because ultimately, improving their pronunciation will help them get what they want. They're going to be more clear. They're going to be more confident. They're going to be more fluent. They're going to get, the things they want in their lives. It's going to make it possible. They're going to feel it's possible for them. They're going to make changes in other areas in their lives. So the focus has to be on them and not, if you say that, people are going to get offended. No, it's important to understand why we're doing what we're doing, but also, they need to understand why it's good for them. Explain the reason behind what you teach. And even if it goes back to pronunciation, right? I can say, okay, you want to use a dark L instead of an ultralight L, right? To say well instead of well, because some people, and then I will explain, right? I didn't just state a fact. I said, no, it's a dark L, but it's a dark L because if you use the light L, people might confuse it with an R because the R and L are often replaced, and people might think that you're just saying where, because they cannot recognize, they don't associate the L sound with what they know as the dark L. So I give them the reason that stays with them, that gives them first the motivation, and second, like, okay, clarity around why this is important. And when something is not that important, I could say the flap T, not that important. It's fun. It will help you connect words together. It definitely makes an impact on how you sound in terms of like the quality of speech, especially if you love American pronunciation, but it's not that important. So I give them the choice, right? If you want to use that, right, this is what it's going to get you, but it's not going to affect your intelligibility, your clarity. So you got to explain the reason why you're teaching what you're teaching and how it's going to impact their speech and their experience speaking. It's also a marketing thing, right? Like, because you have to give them, the incentive to do this work, right? Why would they shadow? But if they shadow, then like they build that like intuitive feel to the language and they improve other things. So like we need to give them the reason for it. And of course, address their mindset, which is a totally different conversation. Maybe we could have it some other time. But the process of how they think about themselves before they speak, while they speak, and after they speak. Before, do they dare speaking? Like, why are they avoiding conversations? Why wouldn't they apply for this job, right? We have to help them recognize that the negative thoughts that they have are just thoughts, are not facts, right? What happens when they're speaking? How judgmental are you? What are the thoughts that go through your head while you're speaking, right? Is that serving you? What does that cost you? And then do you obsess over your mistakes after? You keep repeating them in your head, the fact that you said has instead of have in a meeting and no one cares, but you are like obsessing over it, and that is going to affect how you show up in the meeting next time. So we have to have those conversations. When we teach pronunciation, we have to talk about the fact that it's going to feel artificial. It's going to feel like they're not in their own skin, and that is okay, right? And they need to, the more they practice, they make it their own. But, because they're going to learn all that and they're going to do really well in class, but then they're going to go and speak next to their spouses, and they're going to not dare to use the new sounds because they're going to think, oh, who do they think they are, right? Like, and, oh, they sound so fake. And they have these conversations in their head, so they're not going to use it in real life, and then they're not going to improve. So this needs to be addressed as well. And then use motivating language or make adjustments, because we are speaking about language and language matters. And these are the thoughts that get in their head. And a lot of them have heard, if you make mistakes, you'll sound stupid, in the past, and this is what they carry with them. So the language that you use in class is really important. So things like, speaking of like, stop saying, we never say, modern, we say modern. You can't say this, you have to say that. Stop saying this, and and like this is also what I have against like those messages in Instagram and YouTube, and because come on, like stop saying. Why stop? Like, why do I need to stop? I need to keep saying, I need to keep speaking, I need to do whatever I can to get my words out there, whether they're correct or incorrect, right? As long as the process is free. People are so limiting, and there's so many filters. We don't want to add filters. And sometimes really it's not intentional. Oh, Americans don't say blah, 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 right? So I think it's important to be mindful of that, because we don't want to increase this feeling of not enough, right? Not there yet. This is wrong. Don't mispronounce it like that. So here are the animation. It's totally off, sorry. Let me get to where I want to get. Stop saying, this is wrong. Okay, instead, try saying, let me get to the last slide. I'm going to take the shortcuts here. Hold it, sorry. Like,
Take your time.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. Let me share it again. Okay, instead, I would use the language that explains why this is important. People expect to hear all at the end of words. And if they hear something else, they might just categorize it as a different sound. And then they'll think it's a different word, right? It's not that you are wrong. It's just that they expect to hear something else. And when it clashes, then you are the one who's not understood. Now, I would want people to be more open as they listen and understand those, like replacements or, modified sounds. But, we need to be realistic, and we can't control people's perception, but we can control our own pronunciation. And ultimately, it's for us to be able to speak. You'd sound clearer if you pronounced it, with rounded lips, right? If you dropped your tongue a little bit and the I sound would be closer to an E, right? That would make you sound clearer. The word is going to be clear. Doing X will help you convey your message, right? If you raise the pitch on stressed words, right, it would help you convey your message. So this is why, like, the reason and the action would help you convey your message more clearly and get what you want. Again, bringing it back to their needs. This will help you speak more at ease, right? It's not, oh, you're going to sound unnatural, right? You're going to sound fake. You're going to sound this and that they already have these opinions about themselves. But no, you will feel effortless. How nice would that be, not to be tired at the end? And here's what you need to do, right? So to shift it from how it's going to be perceived, or to shift from like you are wrong or you are doing something incorrectly, to this is the environment, this is how we can improve it. And these are just a few examples, but I think, like that idea is clear. And I think we can all make those shifts really quickly, just understanding that while we want to be clear, we also don't want to repeat messages that are already inhibiting them, right? We want to break that. That is how you create a safe space. There's a lot more. Community, for example, if you can get them to practice with other people, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I see you've developed that. I'm looking at the chat. See that's
Hello.
happening, which is fantastic. Yeah, such an important motivator for practice is other people practicing. Not just, getting together to speak English is great, but even just knowing other people are out there doing the same thing you are.
Yeah.
We have run out of time, but instead of being disappointed, I'm just looking forward, since you already agreed, right? We need to meet again to talk about all of this. I'm really glad it happened this way, because I think if it had been a chat, all the amazing information that you just provided would not have gotten out there for people who really need it. But I have questions. I know folks in the chat have questions. So would it be possible, you think, maybe next month we could have like a part 2 of this, and we'll get the recording out, and that way we can watch it again and think about it. But I already know I could go another hour or 2 hours right now with you. Would that be okay, Hadar? Could we?
Yeah, absolutely. Is it okay with you guys? Would you join us?
Yeses from everybody. I'm so excited to talk to you about the things you were talking about, and share some of my experiences also teaching pronunciation. It's my passion.
I would love to. I have a bunch of questions for you. So
Ooh, cool. Enormous thanks for such a wonderful session here. And thanks so much to all of you who came, and those of you watching the recording. And stay tuned for part 2 of teaching pronunciation intuitively, effectively. If you had questions and you didn't get to interact with us, don't worry. We'll be back. Bye, everybody.
Amazing.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.